You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese and Joe. Simon says we have a great guest today.
Simon says we have a profoundly known researcher, stats and figures guy. The first time we've ever had somebody kind of with his expertise and his experience on the show. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. He started his career at the Trentonian.
And Times.
And the Times, and he eventually
not Trentonian, never. No. Sorry, if you can edit, I would say edit that because I want no association with the Trentonian.
All right, that's fine.
Are you familiar with the Trentonian?
Loosely, yes.
It's a really not place that I would want to. It's a place that I wouldn't want to. I'm sorry. It's a place that I wouldn't want to be associated with.
No, it's totally cool.
Yep.
You were at ESPN. You were a researcher and writer there, and you were the lead researcher at Baseball Tonight for about 6 years. And now you're at Sports Info Solutions, which has kind of expanded the coverage of the sports that they provide data and information to over here in the last couple of years. So again, extensive expertise, huge stats guy, somebody we can pick his brain a little bit. We're really excited to have you on. Gave us a nice little preview there. But yes, Simon says we have Mark Simon on the show today with us. Mark, welcome.
Hi, sorry for
you're totally
the rudeness
good.
There.
You're not rude. You're just excited.
You're excited.
Yep, exactly.
Ready to go. So Mark, appreciate you coming on here. Tell us a little bit about, your childhood here. Did you want to go into sports? And how did you end up deciding on the fact that you wanted to pursue a career in sports? It could have been journalism, it could have been broadcasting, but how did you decide, let me pursue a path here in sports?
This is a path of everything, I think you could say, if we went through all the different things that I do and have done. And it started back really when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old. I found an old tape of mine recently in which I was repeatedly saying, here's the windup and the pitch, over and over and over again, as little kids are wont to do. I had a very early fascination with wanting to be in baseball broadcasting and being the play-by-play guy for the Mets and for the Knicks. Those jobs are really, 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 really hard to get. So I have kind of worked around that. And I have found that there are a number of other things that I like. I was always good at math when I was younger in terms of the basics of arithmetic. So sports statistics I kind of gravitated to from when I was young. My mom was a bookkeeper. My grandmother was a bookkeeper. So I think that came kind of naturally. The writing thing is just something that I have always enjoyed doing. People say that I'm generally like peppier when I write, which is cool. And yeah, I have done the total sports immersion from ever since I was 8. When my parents bought me a Bill James baseball abstract and I started playing Stratomatic, I have been fully immersed in the statistics world, the broadcast world, and the print world as well.
So you go to Stuyvesant High School, and I think Joe went to a rival high school of yours. So Joe, why don't you talk about that rivalry right there?
I took the citywide specialized test and I got into Staten Island Tech. So not direct. I mean, we could consider each other direct rivals, but a couple of my friends who I went to middle school with ended up going to Stuyvesant. But again, pristine high school. I know you grew up on the Upper East Side, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I grew up in Manhattan in a, people think that if you live like near Central Park, that your family must be making 7 figures. My family was not making close to that. My family lived in a rent-controlled apartment. My parents have been there since 1970. But it gave me great exposure to Shea Stadium and Yankee Stadium. And I was a frequent attendee of both of those venues, as well as Madison Square Garden for the Knicks and the Rangers. But yeah, I grew up in New York City, public school system, born and raised. Stuyvesant was wonderful for the time that I was there. Incredibly bright minds, a lot of like-minded people there. And I can remember playing fantasy sports. That was another way that I built my appreciation of numbers, playing fantasy basketball with daily meetings in the Stuyvesant High School auditorium before classes started, where we would negotiate trades and compile our stats by hand.
Wow. I mean,
Yes.
Thought.
way before Yahoo Sports, there was
Yes.
Stuyvesant Sports. I mean, it's
Yeah,
incredible.
fantasy sports used to be this ultra like it was like this
Underground thing.
private. Yeah, it was a very underground type of thing. Because you got to remember the internet was obviously it's changed in 20 years, but there are only so many people who had the internet, back when you were younger, and those lucky few, who were able to do that. Basically, they frequented chat rooms and stuff. But yeah, fantasy sports has definitely changed throughout the years. So it's interesting because there are very few people, I think, who are in your position who really were into fantasy sports at that time and have stuck with it, over the course of the last 25 to 30 years or so.
Yeah, so I can remember the way that we drafted our first set of teams was I took players and I essentially tried to find 10 comparable players at each position, and you went through groups and you had to rank them in each group 1 to 10, and it was like ranked choice selections, and they all gave their sheets to me with their rankings, and then I figured out who got who, and we had these 15-man rosters, and you had lopsided trades. And the highlight of my fantasy sports life is that I traded Mark Price for Larry Nance, and Mark Price tore his ACL the next day. Yeah, it's awful for him. Not looking to make light of that, but I've had very little go right in fantasy sports in the 27 years since, but that was one moment that went well for me.
It's pretty good. Now, what was your decision process or your thought process in deciding to attend the College of New Jersey?
That's a good question, and I think if people are listening to looking for advice on how to do certain things to create a path in this industry, I wanted to go somewhere that was smaller, where there was more attention, where I could get more attention, whether it be from a professor, or I could walk into the school radio station or the school newspaper or the sports information office and immediately be put to work. And that happened with all three of those things by going there. Now, I did apply and I got rejected by Columbia and Northwestern, and I got waitlisted at SUNY Binghamton. But when we went, my mom and I went to the College of New Jersey, there was an open house for students interested in journalism. And my future roommate's father asked the professor that was there, is there room in this school for sports writers? And the professor basically fell out of his chair. He got so excited. And I was like, I think this is the place for me. And sure enough, I was able to work on the school paper from my first week. I was doing on-air work for the radio station a week or two in, and I was doing stats for football games immediately. It was great because I got hands-on experience right away. And I would recommend that to, you could certainly go to Syracuse, you could certainly go to Northwestern. There's a lot of good options out there. But if you want to carve a path where you can kind of, I guess, be front and center for a little while, doing something like that is not a bad way to go.
Yeah, you were certainly a 5-tool student with all the different stuff there, and you were a great prospect. And obviously, you're a Rangers fan. We see your poster there, and you, much like me, were an intern with MSG Networks. What do you remember about that experience? It must have been pretty cool for you growing up.
Oh, it was. And this was at a time when computers were not that sophisticated again. So the internet really didn't really exist. But a couple of cool things happened while I was there. One was that I got to do a feature Q&A with Sam Rosen and John Davidson, then the Rangers broadcaster. Sam's still there, JD no longer with them. And I got to do, and I talked on the phone to JD probably for an hour, and then Sam Rosen just kept talking. And it wound up on the cover of the magazine that they distributed to all their affiliates. So it was a nice clip at the time. They were fantastic. They were supremely nice in every possible way, and it was awesome. And then the other highlights from my experience were I got to go behind the scenes of a Yankee broadcast and see what it was like in the production truck, including going to the like the set that they had set up post game, where Michael Kay interviewed a very, very young Mariano Rivera, who was just like speechless, and it was really interesting to watch that. And then Kenny Albert took me out to lunch. That was definitely the highlight. Kenny Albert took me out to lunch, listened to my tape, and talked me through a couple of things. Gave me a sense where I was on the right track, and that was wonderful. He was fantastic. I can't say enough cool things about that experience. It was only for like 3 months, but it was really awesome.
Yeah, I had the honor of getting Sam Rosen and Kenny Albert hot pretzels when I was interning. I loved it. I was sitting up them with the media, and the radio guy was like, "Go get, Sam. Go get Dave. Go get Joe and Kenny hot pretzels." And it was great. I love that. But I did other great stuff there, and MSG is a tremendous place. And Joe, Kenny Albert, great guy, right? Friend of our show.
Mark was doing his research before he came on here, and he's pretty impressed with our guest list so far. So I'm sure he looked through that and he saw that Kenny was there. And we've obviously had a couple of more people from MSG on our show. But we're going to move on here. I knew if I told you at the top, the Trentonian, I would get a rise out of you. I have your LinkedIn. I have your LinkedIn information in front of me. I know you worked at the Trenton Times, but you were an intern at MSG, and then eventually your first job after that, you did work at the Trenton Times, and you were there for almost 7 years, doing the typical, usually what you do, your first newspaper job, you do high school sports, fill in work. So talk to us about that experience and who was responsible for bringing you over there.
The professor that I had at Trenton State had a relationship with just about every newspaper in New Jersey, where he could place kids simply by saying, "I've got someone for you." And in my case, and in the case of a couple of people that followed after me, I was very fortunate that I wound up at the Trenton Times, and they put me to work right away. So back in the day, so to speak, you started out by covering high school sports, and you were taking phone calls from parents. Where I think the thing that's most important that you would learn out of that is the importance of spelling, because there are, as I learned, there are like 4 ways to spell Brittany and 6 ways to spell Caitlin. And I'm not exaggerating that, and I'm not looking to make fun of that.
There's Caitlin
That's
with a
true.
C, Caitlin with a K.
Yes, and then there's the IN or YN.
Yes.
And then there's other variants on that. And if you were wrong, like if they spelled it over the phone and you got it wrong, they'd be calling the next day.
Of course.
So you didn't want to deal with the wrath of that. So it taught you to really try to get those right. So that was one aspect of it. 2 cool things that I got to do at the Trenton Times, and I was there for a while. One was feature writing. I was the guy that they used to take on the features that were just the weird ones. The 10-year-old karate champ, the 80-year-old 10K runner, what are some of the others? The local stars in various minor sports, figure skaters, things of that ilk. Eventually, I got to progress, though. They let me do a couple of times, or High School Athletes of the Year, which is like a prestige piece to be able to get to do that. And then I got to cover minor league hockey for 2.5 seasons. The Trentonian was owned by a guy who was hockey crazy, Bob Jelinek. And his son was playing high school hockey at the time, and they covered every aspect of the sport as if it was the NHL, and it didn't matter what level, high school, college, pro, whatever. So they treated what you would call AA hockey like it was the NHL, which meant that we had to treat AA hockey as if it was the NHL. And I learned the hard way that I wasn't competitive when it came to getting scoops. The Trentonian writer was way better than me at getting scoops. So I looked for other ways that I could be good at the job. And my way of doing that was to write features. Going back to what I had talked about with the unusual features that I had done, I would find the fan that had traveled, that had driven 9 hours to attend the game and write about them. I went in the candy store across the street from the Johnstown, Cambria County War Memorial Arena, which had been there for like a bazillion years, and the guy had all sorts of stories to tell. So I went in there, I got his story as it related to hockey. Trenton had a game where the lights went out in the middle. I reached out on a message board and said, tell me your weirdest minor league mid-game hockey occurrence. And people had all sorts of crazy things that happened. So that taught me creative ways to deal with the fact that I wasn't good at getting scoops. And it taught me how to cover a team. And we had some real cool people come through. We had Bruce Cassidy, who's the head coach of the Bruins now, was the first coach. And Peter Horacek, who'd been an interim coach in the NHL, who's been an assistant in a number of places, was the last head coach that I dealt with. And then Troy Ward in the middle, he was an AHL coach for a long time. But it was a really fun experience. I like the idea of daily beat reporting and the challenge of trying to make every game interesting, which, game stories are a lot different now. But it was very much a fun and productive job.
Certainly creative. So why don't you tell our listeners about how being a fan of Charlie Brown and sending a note to another guest of our show, Jason Stark, ended up changing your life?
Sure. So there are interesting roots here in a number of different directions. The 20-year anniversary of this famous game is coming up between the Mariners and the Indians, where the Mariners led the Indians 12-0, and the Indians came back and won the game in extra innings. And this was at a time where I knew that I was always going to be part-time at the Trenton Times, and I was very much looking for full-time work. And I was looking for a way to get out. The newspaper industry was not going particularly well at the time, even though I was enjoying the minor league hockey beat. So the first thought that I had when that game ended, I'd come back from the movies, was, wait a second, I know that game. I've seen that game. Where have I seen that game? I know where I've seen that game. I tend to be very all in on a lot of things. And one thing I was very all in on as a kid was Charlie Brown comic strips. So I knew every strip that he had produced that was baseball oriented. And sure enough, there is a game in a Charlie Brown comic strip, series of strips, where Peppermint Patty's team led the opponent 50-0 with 2 outs in the 9th inning. And she said, okay, Charlie Brown, you pitched the last batter. I'll go sell some popcorn. We'll make some extra money. And first pitch from Charlie Brown beans Peppermint Patty in the head. Kaboom. She gets knocked over. She gets knocked out. They wake her up. She comes to. She says, all right, what happened? All good, right? And Marcy says to Peppermint Patty, Charlie Brown gave up 51 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning, and we lost the game 51-50. Your reaction is the reaction that I would hope that anyone that I say this to would have. And so I wrote Jason Stark, and I told him the story of this game. And Jason Stark ran it in his useless information column on ESPN.com. That was before he was at The Athletic, where he is now. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to roll the dice here. Someone had told me that he was really nice and helpful to people. So I said, I wrote an email to Jason Stark. Dear Jason, you don't know me. I don't know you. The only way we know each other is through this stupid contribution that I made to your column. Not stupid, but just silly. Can you just tell me, I know that Baseball Tonight has researchers. I applied for a college basketball researcher job once 5 years ago. And I know that this job exists for Baseball Tonight too. Can you put me in touch with the people who make the decisions so that I don't send my email to a human resources person who will never, ever, ever give it the light of day? Yeah. And he wrote back. That's Jason Stark. Jason Stark writes back. So Jason Stark wrote back and gave me a name. And I wrote that person. That person was Judson Birch. Judson Birch has been at ESPN for 30 years. He's a producer. He used to be the producer of Baseball Tonight. He actually wasn't the right person for this, but he gave me the email of the person who was the right person. And 6 months later, I was sitting in a conference room at ESPN making arguments for why Keith Hernandez should be in the Hall of Fame, and making arguments for, and trying to list out as many 500 home run hitters as I could, which I'm not going to do here. but that was the gist of it. Got the job there, and that was an entry-level job. It was temp, $12 an hour. And I said, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. And I turned temp into almost 16 years. So I think it worked out all right.
I think it worked out okay too. And one of the amazing things, I think, particularly about you, is your fascination with the obscure, your fascination with the ultra specific. Now, there is an early story at ESPN that you have shared elsewhere before, but we would like you to share here, a specific story about Jared Washburn. Tell us about how that story was basically the catalyst for you eventually moving on from that temp status into a more solidified role where it eventually led to being the lead researcher for Baseball Tonight.
Yeah, so in 2002, I had just started, and the role was very much entry level. My job was to print out player biographies and newspaper articles and mail them by regular mail to the broadcasters who were broadcasting the games, because that's how it was done back then. Not now, back then. And so I was doing this, and I was like, I have 6.5 years of writing experience. I've done all sorts of writing. There's got to be a way that I can integrate writing into this role somehow. So I went to the producer for Sunday Night Baseball for opening day, and I said, give me something to do, please. And he said, well, Indians Angels, opening day, Bartolo Colon versus Jared Washburn. We know lots of things about Bartolo Colon. We don't know lots of things about Jared Washburn. Can you educate us on Jared Washburn? Get us something that we don't know. That was like a gift falling out of the sky. Jared Washburn pitched for a Division III college in his career. And I, in my time writing at the Trenton Times, freelanced for a website that was very small back then, but was very kind of up and coming and is very, very well known in the Division III world now, d3hoops.com and d3football.com. And sure enough, I had not long before that spoken to the sports information director at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, where Jared Washburn went to school. So I called him back. I was like, hey, can you help? And he said, sure, let me put you on hold. We'll get you the baseball coach. Now think about that. Like if I called the University of Florida, or if I called an ACC school, they're not going, oh, we'll put you on hold and we'll get you the baseball coach. Maybe you're talking to him, maybe you're not. But here it was like, oh, let's help you out. So the baseball coach comes on the phone. He's like, Jared Washburn? Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you how I taught him how to throw. And I don't remember if it was changeup or slider or whatever, but whatever pitch it was, let me explain how he learned to throw it. And he walked me through the whole thing. And I brought this to the producer for Sunday Night Baseball, and he was like, it was basically an attitude of, well, that was more than we expected. And so they called Wisconsin Oshkosh. They got the photo of him in the baseball cap. We tell John Miller, Joe Morgan, they're all set to talk about this great success story from Division III to opening day with the Angels. And Jared Washburn puts the first 5 freaking batters on base. So the story was put on hold. Now, 2 things happened. One, we had an Angels game like 3 months later and it got in, and all was good there. But 2, it set the tone for what I could do. And it was important to me that I establish in that very early time, since I was a temp and I didn't know how long I was going to be there, that I was good and like that I could do things that other people might not do. And we had a couple of people with writing backgrounds in the research department at the time, but nowhere near as many as we would have now. And so I did that. And then the next week there was another assignment. I think I called someone to talk about Tim Hudson's hitting because he was DH at Auburn. And each week there was something different. And over time, I established that the writing that I could do would be helpful to the broadcast that we aired. Now, can I tell how I get to Baseball Tonight, or is that a different question that you want?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I did that for 2 years. And that got a little frustrating because I was kind of moving in like quicksand there. Doing the same thing, printing out the same articles. College basketball season, I would help out with college basketball, doing similar type things, getting box scores for Digger Phelps, who was notorious for wanting a big stack of box scores at halftime so that he could talk about this guy's got 8 points in the paint and this team's got, a 12-2 edge in offensive rebounds. And I was frustrated. And I can remember I applied for a job and didn't get it. And I remember Bobby Valentine and Carl Ravitch were sitting 30 feet from me when I got the call where I was told that I didn't get the job. Hung up the phone, I was distraught. And from that moment on, things really turned in a positive way. Within a few weeks of that, the head researcher for Baseball Tonight got promoted to management. He became my manager. The backup researcher on Baseball Tonight, because the show has someone that does the weekends back in the time when it was 7 days a week. He got promoted, better job. The third string guy, it's his. Like, it can't be more his than it would have been. He got promoted too, and he got promoted out of the department. He later became the producer of Baseball Tonight. So I'm like waving my hand, hey, call on me, please. Now's the time. Let's go. And after some convincing, because I'd never worked on a TV show before, they put me on the show, and they had this veteran guy who had been there for a few years as the backup. So just in case I screwed up, there was someone who could swoop in and be fine. And I didn't screw up. I was there for 7-8 years. And I know I'm not the only Baseball Tonight researcher that you've had on. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. It was high stress, a lot of shows back then, 2 shows a night. And I was like the information person for the show, which was a lot better than printing out articles and mailing them to broadcasters.
It's a real shame that Baseball Tonight is only on for 1 hour a week as a pregame show, which is not what I like to see. But I guess we're lucky we're in a day and age with MLB Network, and you have MLB Tonight.
Sure. And a lot of the people that are on MLB Network or that are working there behind the scenes cut their teeth on Baseball Tonight. Like a good number of their producers were the people that I worked with who were like production assistants and associate producers who have moved up the ladder and done great. And such is life. It really was unfortunate, but that's ESPN's decision, and they're looking to make money, and the money is not necessarily in baseball for them.
Yeah, I mean, now Baseball Tonight, most well known for being a feeder system for Major League Baseball managers. So you go to work at Baseball Tonight, you become a manager.
So can I say something about that? Because I've certainly worked with a couple. So this is a brutal name drop, but like Aaron Boone was awesome. Aaron, so when we worked on Baseball Tonight, they decided to make the show more analytic friendly and more statistically intense at one point. And it was the point at which he came in. And at that point, most of the graphics and information that aired on the show was of the fun fact variety or the very basic piece of information. Like you'll see it parodied all the time, 6 home runs on a Tuesday or whatever. It never was that, but that's the parody of it. Aaron Boone walks into the first Baseball Tonight meeting, and I'm quoting a stat about him that was on Fangraphs 30 seconds before he walked in. So they have me repeat it for him. And it was about like how he had fared in clutch situations. And his immediate response was, "What's the sample size?" And I was like, oh my God. It was like a completely different world. A couple of weeks later, I printed out I had an article in a book that I wanted to show him about something that was analytic in nature. I showed it to him, and he came back the next day and talked about it with me. It was like a completely different world. And that was different from the kind of analysts that you had before. That's not John Kruk. That's not Harold Reynolds. They do what they do, and they do it well. But Aaron Boone's really thinking persons. And not only that, like he's an incredibly enjoyable person to watch a sporting event with, whatever sport, because he watches it like he's a fan, like the Sixers or something like that. He's like, or USC, forget it. I know you've had a number. I said you've had a number of Baseball Tonight researchers on. I know that there would be universal agreement that he was awesome when he was at ESPN. He was great to deal with.
So a lot of different personalities that you're working with. Obviously, Carl Ravitch, Buster Olney, Tim Kirkshin, the originals. Peter Gammons was there at a point. Yep. And then, of course, Adnan Virk. So how did you learn each person's like dead tendencies and needs? Because everybody wants things differently. I had the pleasure of working in the studio with Adnan on a show, and he wants crazy things. He wants to chirp in his ear the whole time, but maybe not necessarily about the game. Maybe just funny stuff. But how do you learn everybody's different needs, and how do you know? Okay, I need to get him or her this packet before the game, or this person I'm going to have to be in their ear a lot during the show.
Boy, it's funny because there's such a contrast in people, and it's just a way. It's just the easiest way to do it is just to talk to them as much as you can, within reason. Carl Ravitch and Steve Berthume, who was one of the backups to Carl, now the broadcaster for the Diamondbacks, couldn't be more different in their preparation. Carl Ravitch basically could do the show blindfolded, and I challenged him that he should do the show blindfolded, where he doesn't need to be able to see anything. Because he's so good. I can remember he had to do like a 45-second lead in to something, like a feature. We go to the commercial break right before that, and he asked me like 6 questions, and I'm spouting out number after number after number after number after number. He's not writing anything down, and he recites it perfectly, and he weaved it in a way such that he told this incredible story in those 45 seconds that led into this feature. I'm like, how the heck did he do that? Steve Berthume likes everything written out. Steve Berthume had a saying where he would have a huge stack of papers in front of him, and he'd be like, no one mess with this. These papers are the show. And he'd have his shot sheets. He would have his notes. He would have any advertising copy that he needed to read. So the way that I learned is just through talking to people. I learned that Aaron Boone likes this. I learned that Nomar doesn't like stats. So I went to Nomar one night and I just said, look, you and I don't have to talk that much, but give me one thing that I can get you where when I get it for you, you'll be like, oh, that's really useful. And he said, I want to know anytime I'm talking about a guy who's not good with runners on third base with less than 2 out. To me, when I played, that was mandatory that you had to get the guy in. No ifs, ands, or buts. It was the most important thing for me, the guy that could do that. So anytime like Mark Reynolds would do something, I would go up to him and I would explain just how bad Mark Reynolds was at getting runners in from third base with less than 2 outs. And it got me in with Nomar. Easy way to get in with Adnan, talk movies with him. You learn that pretty quickly, right? Like if you talk to Adnan Virk for 5 minutes, he's quoting 3 different movies. He's
the voice of Monday Night Raw.
Yeah, exactly. WWE. What, like you pick up on little things. I always immediately first thing I would do, like when I'm getting a new anchor, is I'd find out where they went to school, because then and what era they went to school, because then you know that okay, I can talk about Syracuse University in the Derek Coleman era, or the John Wallace era, or whatever. Just something that you can talk about your anchors with to make them think, hey, this person is going to work with me. And as I said, different guys have different styles. For Steve Berthume, I listened to how he talked on the air, and I tried to integrate the words that he used into what I wrote, because I knew that he would be comfortable with that. With Carl, like the thing that I had with Carl was that if he made a mistake on Baseball Tonight, he could hear me or see me out of the corner of his eye pound my fists on the desk. And he would know that he had to look back at the last couple of sentences or think back the last couple of things that he had said to see if he botched a number or messed something up. And he'd fix it. And I'm like, this guy's unbelievable. So that would be my way of advising people. If you're going to work with people closely, get to know them, not just on the sports side, but on the people side too.
Yeah, you got to work with truly unbelievable people, tremendously nice people, genuine people. That must have been so much fun to do. So I wanted to get into your tail end time here at ESPN, because during the course of your 16 or so years there, actually 15, but social media, the rise of social media, I think a lot of people, there was an increasingly more of a demand, I think, for stats in particular, with the analytics way of in baseball first and now within other sports. I think somebody in your position really ended up taking advantage of that, because you eventually moved away from Baseball Tonight and you became a digital publishing specialist. and you were the one who was behind the scenes doing the work for the ESPN stats and info pages, the Twitter handle, and all that. And you see the increase there now that social media has really blown up here in the last 10 years. Some of those pages are the most popular when fans or people in particular, as they're watching a broadcast, they go to those pages. So talk to us about how you were approached to expand your role there at ESPN, and how the duties and the responsibilities changed now that you were increasing your scope of the sports you had to cover.
Sure. Baseball Tonight is a bit of a grueling show if you're working on it 5 days a week, 2 hours a night, especially if you're someone that puts pressure on yourself, as I'm known to do in certain instances. So after a period of time, I needed to kind of get away from that. They created a position that allowed me to do that. Where I was essentially overseeing all of the baseball information that our department was putting out, because we had game broadcasts, we had Baseball Tonight, we had digital, we had all these different areas, spokes, essentially, where we were popping out different content. They wanted one person to be in charge of it, like, train the people and, shape the direction and things of that sort. And I did that for like a year and a half, and it was all right, but it wasn't the same. And it was right around that time that ESPN, I guess, pivoted a little bit off of baseball and into other things. And my bosses came to me and said, we're going to change this position, but we're going to make it to something that you're going to like. It's going to be writing based and social media based. And can you just switch over? And I was like, all right, that's fine. I didn't object to it. I was a willing participant. So I did that for a bunch of 6 years or so. And it really began with just helping ESPN.com look up things for articles that they were writing, and occasionally writing something for them. And then it progressed to social media, where my boss said, do you think people will be interested if we share interesting tidbits and statistics on Twitter? And it wasn't just me, there were 3 of us, and we're like, let's try it. So we tried it, and as is the case with a lot of things at ESPN, they can blow up pretty quickly. And we went from 0 to, I think when I left, it was 1.5 million. And that's not the formula for that was literally tweet good things that sports fans like. That was all we did.
Keep it simple. Stupid.
Simple photos, fun, interesting. There are certain players that kind of are gravity for something like that. Michael Jordan was in the very beginning. We could get 1,000 retweets with anything Michael Jordan or whatever. So yeah, we did that. I can remember there was a Pacquiao fight where it just went way beyond what you could have imagined in terms of social media engagement. Gradually, that became a very popular thing. They eventually, like back then, I would do that. I was the nighttime tweeter. So like I'd come in at like 5 and I would be tweeting and writing until like whatever the last event was done. So that's a fairly grueling job too. And I did that for 6.5 years. And then they decided that they were going to combine the tweeting with other things. And I wasn't as skilled in other things. And that is kind of what led to me moving on elsewhere. And that's fine too. We can gladly talk about that.
Yeah. Imagine how big Howie Schwab would have been if he was in the heyday of social media.
Yeah, well, yeah, like Howie Schwab was the original ESPN Stats and Information. Like he was,
he is
the guy. And so, just to articulate briefly, I didn't work on television for like 6 years, and they wanted me to be back in the television side. And I didn't. I didn't want to do that, and B, I didn't handle that all that great. So I was like, I think I was kind of burning out. And I realized that it was time to start looking for something else before I was told to start looking for something else. And fortunately, this company that I work for now had a business deal with ESPN, and I was the liaison to that company. And thus I knew the president and the owner. And I was very fortunate that when I brought the idea of leaving ESPN up to a number of different people, they were the ones that bit. And they created a position for me. And here I am now.
Yep, senior research analyst and a content producer for Sports Info Solutions. And from making that switch over, we've been seeing a good amount of you on MLB Now and MLB Network.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts there when you got approached for that? Was that BK, Brian Kenny reaching out to you? Was that Adnan? How did that come about? And any nerves going live?
Yeah, TV's not for me. I'm not particularly good at it. And I willingly admit that, and I don't like actively go crazy trying to get it. Brian Kenny saw me after I had left ESPN working for Sports Info Solutions at the Sabre Analytics conference and brought it up to me as an idea. And I was like, okay, all right. And then, as I said, a lot of the producers at MLB Network know me. So eventually it came to happen. And I've done, how many times I've been on? I think 3. The last one was fun. I've been on with John Smoltz a couple of times. And like when I was younger, John Smoltz was like the scourge of my existence.
Oh,
so,
the guy.
So it's just, it was very cool to be treated as a peer with those people. And I talked about the books that my company produces. For those that don't know, our company has an expertise in statistical analysis as it pertains to defense in baseball, and we are involved in other aspects of that sport. We service a couple of dozen, we service about 20 something teams with tools and with data to help them on player evaluation and game strategy. And it was neat. I was extremely nervous, and it comes through if you watch any of those. Please don't, because I was not good. But there was a funny moment. I just, if I could share one. I was at one of John Smoltz's very best games, and I was at one of Cliff Floyd's very best moments, and they were sitting on each side of me. And the producer had the idea that I would say that we would end the show by me saying that I was the good luck charm to each of these people. And he's like, I'll be in your ear. I'll talk you through it. We've got the highlight of each of the moments that you're talking about. We put it up on the screen. The guest gets the last word. I get to speak. I'm talking, and I completely blew the time. And the show ends with me in mid-sentence.
Think baseball.
And they're laughing at me. And it's great. It's great TV. In the moment, it felt horrible.
I mean, every time you're on with Adnan, he texts me. He's like, "Get a picture of me and Mark."
Yeah.
So he must be expecting something to happen.
So Adnan was good about. I did one from home with him. And that was an interesting experience too, because he kind of took it all over the place. But yeah, it's I think there is something to be said though for knowing your lanes, and TV on air is not necessarily my best lane. But if people want to have me, I guess I'll be there if they want to have me.
You're very fortunate that you've gotten to be surrounded by a lot of great people who are able to make it work and maybe hide any insecurities or reservations that you have about doing TV.
Sure.
I do have one Sports Info Solutions questions here because the company used to be very baseball centric, and in recent years it's expanded the scope of the sports that it covers. Now it does a lot of NBA work, a lot of NFL work. So did that happen before you came on, or was that something that happened after you came aboard, and were you a part of that process in any way?
So the company had started into football. The company had started into football in like 2016. So they were already going in that direction.
Right.
They've been looking for other ways that they can impact the sports world. We hired the former Phoenix Suns director of basketball analytics to be the head of our basketball group. And we've started a couple of different basketball analytic products where we have 10 people watching the top 100 NBA prospects and charting every single thing that they do to come up with different ratings for what they do well and what they do poorly. But yeah, they've looked to go in essentially taking the same principles as you would see in the baseball stuff that we do, with things like a defensive run saved or some of the other statistical ventures that we pursue. And we apply them to football and we apply them to basketball. Our people, to watch a football game with our people is a extraordinary experience, I guess you would say. It takes 3 people 20 hours combined to watch one football game and chart everything that we track.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for any of the sports. But my role is to take the content and to simplify it so that whether it's someone from a team that comes and asks, why is this guy not good on defense? Or I can articulate on social media to a fan, why is this guy really good at defense? So that's my primary job, is to take complicated concepts and try and simplify them for sports fans. Share good things that sports fans like. Same concept.
That's awesome. So we appreciate you coming on. We really, really enjoyed this. Like I said, we're not really used to having too many stats people on. Yes, we have had some Baseball Tonight researchers on with us, but we definitely enjoyed your time here. I want to let you go. One last thing is usually what we do here. We always give our guests the last words. We always give them something else to share and promote. But I'm going to bring up your other podcast that you do.
Oh man, there's a bunch.
There is a bunch. The primary one that you ended up showing me was the Journalism Salute, which I think our listeners can probably figure out what that is primarily about. But it was here that you ended up sharing a common connection that we have that I really value and cherish myself. So our listeners know that I have worked at NHL.com loosely on and off for the course of the last 5 years or so. Editor-in-chief of NHL.com is a man by the name of Bill Price, who was previously working at the Daily News before he got the job at the NHL. You have a connection to Bill Price, and he was recently on an episode of the Journalism Salute that you did last month. So as we let you go here, share to our listeners what that's about.
Sure. So the Journalism Salute is something that I created during the pandemic because I was bored. And I wanted to do something that was
kind of like what we did here.
Yes, exactly. Only I wanted to do something that wasn't sports, because I do a podcast for work. I do a baseball podcast for work. That is fun. It's great. I love it. But I wanted to do something that was non-sports, that showed that I could take sports concepts and do something serious. So I like journalism. So I said, let me find, there's all these great journalism organizations out there that until recently I have never heard of. So like one by one, I'm picking them off and talking to people from all these different groups. And we have someone like the guests vary from, we had an 80-something-year-old woman who's covering the United Nations. We had a guy who was just hired to cover Native American issues for NBC News. We had 3 women who started an environmental website that is specific to Florida. We get hyper-specific, we get hyper-local. Each episode of the podcast ends with a tribute to the professor that pivoted my career, Dr. Robert Cole, who was a legend in the state of New Jersey. Bill Price, your friend at NHL.com, was a student of Dr. Cole's in the 1980s. And he and I have actually never met, but we've corresponded a bunch of times about various things, including I think I made a job inquiry to him before I wound up at ESPN. He's had some really, really cool jobs. He's the editor-in-chief of NHL.com. It's awesome. And he was a student of this professor. And the story he told, so each student tells a story about this professor, and that's how we end the show. And his story was about the 1986 World Series and how the Mets won it. And the next day he goes to class and Dr. Cole knows that he's a Mets fan. And Dr. Cole says, what the hell are you doing here? You should be at the parade. Come on. That was Dr. Cole, though. Dr. Cole loved baseball, and he was the best. And Bill Price tells the story very well, and with a few swears thrown in.
He's somebody who is kind of a little rough around the edges when you meet him. He doesn't really show too much emotion, but I listened to the ending of the podcast that you showed me before, and he really, really opened up, and it was really interesting and fun to see him in that kind of way. And that's a fun freaking story.
Yep. So if I can say one other thing too, I think the
Yes.
importance of paying it forward is important with regards to getting to like the level that I feel like I've gotten to a good level over 26, 27 years. And paying it forward is important. And I can tell you that I have helped or tried to help a number of other people, including people that you're familiar with their careers, if they were to reach out to me in the same manner that I reached out to Jason Stark.
Yep.
Because I think if you show the initiative to do that, that initiative should be rewarded.
Shout out to
Absolutely.
Sarah Langs, perhaps. We'll
That's
see.
who it was. Yep, yeah, you got it. That's one, but there's a couple. I'll give
Yeah.
a couple of others too. Do you know? There's Tom Haberstroh at NBC's, who used to be at NBC Sports. He was at ESPN as well, and John Fisher, who is the director of research at CBS Sports. I like to call it my Belichick tree or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
But I have a decent Belichick tree
You do.
as far as that goes. And I will say this with Sarah, that all I did was I played a very small part in that. I sent in an email that she wrote to me asking for advice. The last line of my advice was, you could always apply to ESPNcareers.com.
Yeah,
You've seen where it's
Sarah's
and you've
really
seen where
great
it's
with
taken
us.
her. She's done the rest.
And she has tremendous energy, and you have tremendous energy yourself. So thank you for assisting us and helping us and treating us as you did the previous people that you ended up helping out.
You got it.
We appreciate it, Mark. So that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right, for our very special guest, Mark Simon, and my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.